Oi, oi, all right. I'm Grant. You're watching Doodle Review, and this is the top 50-ish songs of 2023 so far. So rather than do a countdown, I've actually made a playlist, and the rules of this playlist were that all the songs had to have come from an album released in 2023. It had to include all genres, and it had to flow as best as it possibly can. You can check this playlist out for yourself with the link in the description below. But make sure you comment, tell me what I've missed. I'm sure I've missed something, and what flows and what doesn't. Take us to task. But without further ado, let's get into it. The top 50 tracks of 2023 so far. So I had to start with an absolute belter, and that is "Sad Dumb Game" by Single Mothers. This has one of the catchiest, most instant rock riffs I've heard this year, off of an album that's surprisingly good despite the change in direction for the band. And "Sad Dumb Game" transitions beautifully into another instant banger of a riff in "Fog Machine" by White Reaper. From here, we take a little bit of a left turn sonically. We keep the pace, but we lose the distortion. And although we lose the distortion, spiritually, I feel like Sunny War isn't a million miles away from the rock and roll punky vibe. And we have "Test Dummy" from her. And that serves as a nice gateway to get us to "Satanist" off the Boy Genius record, which didn't totally blow my mind, but this track became a clear highlight for me. And it goes from a mid-tempo distorted start to a kind of dream poppy ending, which gets us to "Welcome to My Island" by Caroline Polachek. The initial wailing on this track grated the hell out of me, but I got past that, and now the chorus to this kind of 90s throwback with a slight art pop, hyper pop edge just has me wanting to belt it at the top of my lungs. It's a banger. So from here, we get to a really cool early 2000s UK garage vibe with Kalela's "Missed Call" off of her fantastic Raven album. And I love the transition from this into "Worth the Wait" by Kali Uchis, which is a highlight off of her fantastic new album. This track is just so smooth, and those backing vocals are hooky as hell. And from here, we take a little jazz detour with one of the few instrumentals from the latest Dinner Party album. I wasn't totally on board with the full record, but this is a great tune and gets us to "Running Out of Time" by Lil Yachty. This was obviously Yachty's big left turn of an album going into a psychedelic rock era. This track plays it closer to funk and is one of the more accessible on the record, because the record as a whole has lots of long and jammy tracks, but I think this one's great. It's cool, funky vibes. It also leads us into one of the more surprising transitions on the playlist, leading into the very classic sounding "Love Doesn't Live Here Anymore" by the Arcs. This is heartbroken Dan Auerbach at his best, but a little less sorry for itself than other stuff we'd heard from him in this style, like stuff off the Black Keys Turn Blue record. The Arcs then gets us nicely to "Been to the Mountain" by Margot Price, who herself took a little detour into the 70s with some AM radio rock interspersed with her typical country Americana style. And then this more rock feel gets us to one of my favourites off the latest Screaming Females record, "Ornament," which applies their typical raw sound to a 90s sounding pop rock tune. And with this kind of fade out, we get over to "Feel Loop" by Gaz Coombs. I'm sure he hates the comparison to Tom York, but I'm going to say it. Although this does have a more guitar-y edge compared to the Radiohead's frontman's kind of later solo work. Then we get to a controversial track on the list. Like, obviously, Slow Tie has been accused of a pretty serious crime, and if I had a bigger platform, I probably wouldn't have included him at all. But ultimately, I kind of, I believe in innocent until proven guilty, and I just hope that he genuinely is innocent, because if not, fuck that guy. As it stands, I enjoy this song in particular, especially for the strange sample it starts with and the story it tells. And from here, we get to "Never Let Me Go." We get to take a bit of a dark twist with a gritty, dark electronic track from the typically dark and goth Depeche Mode, which pairs nicely with "Electric Blue" off the most recent Boldy James record. This is a track that reminds me a little of Kid Cudi, with Boldy's trademark Detroit bars on top. Given the long outro of this track, we get the opportunity to then segue to "Oil," one of the few tracks I actually enjoy from the latest Gorillaz album, which I didn't really get on with initially, but I've warmed to. And this track is a great one, and it leads nicely into Figure Eight, one of the many absolute bangers on Paramore's fantastic. This is why. It's not a crossover hit, this one. This is one of the more deeper cuts on the record, but I think it's amazing and it offers a nice transition into I Saw by Young Fathers. Here we trade the rolling marimba of the last track to thunderous marching drums to get us ready for the huge energy of God Loves You by JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown. One of the less weird tracks on that record that won't fully scare the hoes or the bros, but it does usher in a fairly chaotic energy on this playlist where the sample vocals of this track give way to the crashing waves of the relentless wah pedals of Six Pack by Shane, transitioning into the straight up chaotic weirdness of Tropical Fuckstorm's The Golden Ratio. I mean, this is just a prime example of the TFS sound. It's lunacy, but weirdly engrossing. This track is almost too much. So we then have to take it down a little with I'll Remember You, I'll Remember Me from the Yeji record. I wasn't that impressed with this album overall, but this track is really cool. It's sparse, dark, and foreboding. And on this playlist, it takes us perfectly into Parody, one of the slower tracks from the latest Eve Tuma record. It uses that slower pace to really build the tension and explode though. And from here, we get to jump to The End Is Now by the vastly underrated HMLTD record. With its samples, pianos, synths, and acoustic guitars, it's a definite highlight from the record and really reminds me of the David Bowie tune Outside. The ending kind of takes it right down, and this allows us to segue out of post-punk weirdo music into Running with the Tribe, a fantastic piece from one of the Jazz Is Dead records we received this year and a personal favourite. Starting with a walking bass line, it builds into a really nice groove and takes us into the title track of Brandy Younger's incredible album Brand New Life. Brandy is a jazz harpist, and this is one of many beautiful tracks on her album that pays tribute to Dorothy Ashby as well as includes her own compositions, and this actually serves as a nice transition into some hip hop on the playlist finally. Starting with Kill Switch by Navy Blue featuring J-Rock, an example of the great low-key raps on Navy's Ways of Knowing LP, and it segues us beautifully into one for the old school heads, the boom bap heads, Alone. The beats performed by El Michel's Affair and the bars are from Black Thought. It's a solid slice of golden age vibes, made all the better knowing the instrumental was played live. The little fade out of this and fade in of the next gives us the chance to get into this West Coast G-Funk throwback and stand out from the estate sale, Tyler the Creator's Boyfriend Girlfriend, one of my favourite tracks of 2023. And keeping the vibes upbeat, we get the chance to hop into the disco world of Jessie Ware from here with Pearls. I absolutely love this record. It's a great follow-up to What's Your Pleasure, and this song has me straight from the opening vocal melody. Where we go from here is a bit of an instrumental from the latest Unknown Mortal Orchestra album. The record itself is a bit patchy, but this is a nice segue track, starting with a little groove and ending with some really pretty piano, which slows us down enough to get to Borrow Trouble from Feist's album. This is a really unique sounding and quite powerful track off of the otherwise quiet album from Feist. It's a bit of an iffy transition, to be honest, but it had to go somewhere, and it does provide the opportunity to get into one of my favourites off the latest Lana album, Paris, Texas. And then, levelling up even more, one of my absolute favourites of the year, Was It You by Nick Waterhouse. I actually can't talk about Nick Waterhouse enough. If you're into that old school doo-wop, rockabilly, rock and roll, R&B sound, you really must check out this guy. Now, this album, The Fooler, is a bit of a sidestep for him in general. It's a little downbeat and solemn, but where it works is this track. It's haunting and a total earworm. I love it. Okay, now taking it back down to instrumentals, here we get to Icarus, a song off the fantastic Mark Barrett album, Johatsu. If you like jazz-leaning ambient, you need to check out this soundtrack album. And this one goes really nicely with Run a Red Light. Run a Red Light is a really atmospheric, moody little ballad from Everything But the Girls' solid comeback album. One of my favourites off that album. I can't recommend it enough. And from here, we kind of take it back to an instrumental with Paraclete Bishiyakati track off of the Fire Tools album that I didn't like, but this track was like a digital bath in the midst of that chaos and takes us to a different vibe on this playlist where we get to go to Kanona off the latest Ali Farkatora compilation, which marks the last slow ambient kind of alternative song we have before we get back to the heavy. We do this slowly, starting with a slow new wave burn on Comments from Iggy Pop's surprisingly good Every Loser, into the straight up rock and roll from Bad Religion refused supergroup Fake Names. And from here, it's a bad transition, but we had to get it in. We Are Scientists song Settled Accounts. I really didn't like this record at all. I hated the pop glossy production, but this song found its way here because, I don't know, it's a banger. It found its way as an earworm. And we go from here to another slightly awkward transition. I will give you that. Cussing Christians by Country Westerns. They're a beer-soaked punk band disguised as a Americana Heartland out band, and they're awesome. We get here to go to I Think I Might Be Weird from Fucked Up. This track is just really fun with guitar parts that follow the vocals. It's a big return to form for Fucked Up, and I love it. And then speaking of the fun, we move from here to probably one of the funnest tracks I've heard this year, Hollywood Baby by 100 Gex. It's like if Barbie Girl by Aqua and Last Resort by Papa Roach had a baby. And speaking of the Papa Roach, the singer from this band really reminds me of them. We're taking it down a little bit with a bit of Free from the Sun by MS Paint. And then into one of my favourites off this great album. If you like Deftones, if you like My Vitriol and a dash of Smashing Pumpkins, you've got to get this new Narrowhead record. And the title track will just swallow you whole. You'll love it. Shit starts to get real here, and we jump in with Dicey, a straight up hardcore rager from Gel, before we get into one of the heaviest on the entire playlist, Tunnel Vision by Jesus Peace. This will fucking end you, but if it doesn't, take 52 Fatal Strikes by Zulu. And then we cap off this playlist, this 50 tracks of 2023, with an absolute banger, the title track off Drain's latest record. It's Living Proof, and that's it. We got there. Took me a while, sorry. As I said, you can check this playlist out with the link in the description below. That will take you to my Spotify. It's worth giving that a follow because I'll be making a lot of playlists in the future. So yeah, check it out. And, do let me know what you think of this. Do you think the playlist flows? Do you think it's all bollocks? Do you think I've made some massive errors and missed out on loads of things? I don't know. You tell me. But if you made it this far, fucking well done to you. Hopefully speak to you soon.